on.
Awesome.
Cool. Hey guys, welcome back to the Quad Method. Today I'm with Tomas Claesen, who is, I almost got that wrong. He's one of the quad techs at RhythmX and the Blue Knights, and today he's going to kind of give us some insight on his experience as an educator and as a performer. He marched Santa Clara Vanguards back in 2010 and Cavies in 2011 and Academy 2000.
Academy, yep. 0809.
Okay, 0809. So he's got a lot to offer, and I'm pretty excited to have him on today. So we're going to go ahead and start off with a couple topics, and if you guys have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll kind of get to them as we go along. So just, Tomas, just being around for as long as you've been around, how have you kind of seen the activity kind of evolve, or the drumline scene evolve since you started back in high school or at the academy?
Well, funny fact you bring up high school, because I never was in band in high school.
Oh, wow.
Because, yeah.
Okay.
Because originally I'm from Belgium, born and raised, and we just don't really have high school band there. American football is just also not a thing there. They're,
You have real
like
football.
Yeah. Soccer or real football, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, since 2010 or 2008, my rookie year, I think the main difference is WGI was already becoming really popular at that time, like my rookie year, but I definitely remember in '08, not many drum corps had done much body movement, and I think that's just standard vocabulary now. And it's expected that drummers just, come into auditions and just know how to move their bodies, not just from a marching perspective, but also just standard body movement vocabulary. And so I think in 2008, that was really the first year a lot of groups started incorporating body movement as we know it today. I remember Blue Devils '07 was kind of the first extended phrase, or like that drum feature, where it was a lot of body movement, and then it kind of started bleeding in to drum corps more and more, and just over the past 10 years, not just body movement, but just, I think there are a lot of good drum lines, and I think it used to be less like that, because just fewer members were involved year round. So I think that has just had a huge impact on body movement, just general drumming vocabulary, but also the expressive part of drumming. We're not just hiding under shakos or hats anymore, Aussies, if you will. We're becoming really expressive, and I think a lot of that is just from WGI and how innovative that organization is.
For sure. I know, the whole emphasis on visual and body stuff has definitely been a huge up-and-coming kind of idea in the last even 6 years. Do you think that musicality has suffered at all because of the increase of focus on visual?
Oh man, sure. At times, certain groups, certain individuals, certain years, certain shows, maybe. I don't think one has to necessarily go at the expense of the other. I think that kind of separates good drum lines from great drum lines, because ideally everything kind of goes together when it's designed well and also executed well. Like body movement is a way to be expressive. So is body language. Like if you just look at facial expression, and so are dynamics and balance. So yeah, it's adding a variable, just a responsibility. Like if you're talking about simultaneous responsibilities, if you look at just older drum videos, let's say '90s drum corps, a lot of it was marching, also marching at slower tempos, And it's basically marching and playing as the two main responsibilities. Now you have a third one, which is body movement. So it's like quad drumming. It's you have, let's say you're just playing snare drum, and let's also say you're playing match grip, then your only responsibility is the y axis, your rhythm and your dynamics. As soon as you introduce arounds, then you want to keep your first responsibilities of dynamic and rhythm, but also execute the around. And it's different levels. Maybe beginning quad drummers are, let that suffer. Maybe the first time you do body movement, you let the musicality suffer. But I think it's also in the learning process. Let's say a very advanced line. Um, it has a certain chunk of music at a certain level, and then the design team decides to add body, then the quality is going to suffer because you're just focusing on that. But then eventually you'll get it back, or even better, as what it was.
Yeah, it's sometimes I mean I'm this is I just aged out, so it's like I'm not like I'm old or anything, but it's kind of cool. It's kind of crazy what some of these groups kind of come up with in terms of just body, adding body to playing and all that. Me personally, my time at Blue Devils was awesome, but sometimes I do wish we spent a little bit more time just learning how to play better. We had a very heavy focus in visual and even dancing and choreography and stuff, which was cool, but oftentimes the battery, we never really did any of that in the show. That was left more for the horn line. So sometimes I just wish we would just take some time and focus on just playing stuff better. Because obviously we could have played a lot of stuff a lot better. So yeah, but I mean it comes.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
There's just never enough time either.
You would think 3 months straight together would be enough time, but
yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's interesting having deadlines and 3 months of, let's say, between 4 hours and 12 hours a day. Would seem like enough, like you said, but it never is. I think it's also, different groups. I have never been a part of the Blue Devils organization, but I would say that visually the program is very advanced and very serious and very successful. And it's just kind of part of the identity too. If I had to compare to maybe Vanguard, then the shift of responsibilities and where they spend most of their time, and I haven't been a part of Vanguard since Rennick came there, but just as an outsider and competing with both groups, that's just kind of what I see. So yeah, I guess it's part of the identity too, where you put the stress.
For sure. Man, on a personal note, I was really sad when they got rid of the Aussies, man. Like I thought that was like, well, them and Cavies, like the Aussie was like their signature. But it's cool. I mean, I don't know if you have much to say about this, but like, do you have any opinions on like the whole? Somebody's calling me. The whole uniform thing, kind of going indoor a little bit.
Opinions, sure. One thing I've learned in drum corps is that everything changes. My rookie year, drum corps wasn't the same as my age out year, and 2019 drum corps is not going to be the same as 2017 drum corps when I started at Blue Knights. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
I think the uniforms, like let's take Vanguard for example. I loved those uniforms last summer. I thought they were really cool.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
Like that uniform just wouldn't have worked with an Aussie. But then if you look at Cavaliers, they kind of incorporate that identity a little more, or that part of their identity, because Vanguard still has plenty of traditions living on. But they still take the Aussie, including like the drum majors at retreat. I don't know if you've ever noticed.
Yeah,
but not just the drum majors, but also the guard captains. also have a cape and an Aussie.
Oh, okay, maybe. No, I don't recall that. But
Yeah. So with all these evolutions, I remember in 2013, that was Cavaliers' Secret Society,
hmm
and the members had capes at the beginning of the show, and then kind of took them off as we went. Um, and then a huge part of the show was in the greens, like the uniform, but no Aussie. And then at the end, we put on the Aussies, if I remember correctly. So that was, starting to take the classic uniform and just using ingredients. And I remember some of the members were a little upset because, they grew up watching Cavaliers videos and all those years, all of the 2000s. Cavaliers just wore that uniform or, a very similar one year to year, but had the Aussie. So I think that's part of it too. Grow up dreaming of wearing this uniform, and then the year you get there, they change it. But I think we're a lot more used to that nowadays. And yeah, like you said, it's also just something, a fashion maybe, or an idea that just kind of blew over from winter guard and winter percussion.
yeah, and there's been talk about, sometimes people are talking about like who the first group to do it, and I think Bluecoats back in '09 were the first people to kind of try that idea. They had like some sort of blue, like blue
Hmm.
tights or something. So
It was yeah, some type of shirts or long sleeve shirts. Can't quite remember. Funny fact about Belgium is I'm pretty sure those were inspired. They were like clouds, cloudy skies, so
yeah.
like blue and white.
hmm
Uh, Pretty sure that was inspired by a Belgian painter by the name of Magritte.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
yeah.
Uh, Really, just out of curiosity from me, if so, you didn't do band in high school. How did you kind of get into the activity, or especially like overseas?
Ooh, hold on. I just saw a question come in about Aussies.
Oh,
Um,
oh yeah, sure.
I'd be relevant to answer that first before we go on.
What's an Aussie?
It is the hat that Santa Clara Vanguard, Cavaliers, and Crossmen, and I might be forgetting other groups, I'm sorry, have traditionally worn. Crossmen still had them last summer, I think. It's, a hat, and one side is up. And actually, that comes from, oh, here's the spelling, by the way, in the chat. It actually comes from Australia, is what I've learned, because I think Rangers just wear their gun on one side or a rifle, and so it has to go like it sticks up, and that's the side that the Aussie, like the brim, is up on that side.
Oh, cool. I did not know that.
Yep,
Was it kind of coincidental that you went to the two biggest groups that used Aussies?
that is coincidence.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. Okay. Well, actually, we'll come back to the other question. Let's go ahead and answer kind of a few of these
Sure.
other questions. So, how many heads and sticks do you guys go through during DCI? Like
Good question.
sets of quad heads or like individual heads? Because uh,
By the way, if I'm looking away, just for the viewers, I have the questions pulled up on my second monitor.
okay.
Let's see. Well, most groups in the summer kind of have um, full head changes, is what we call them. And I can imagine it was the same at Blue Devils. It's kind of where
Yep.
no matter how dead the heads sound every week or every week and a half or every 2 weeks, the whole quad line changes all their heads. That was at least the case at when I marched Academy, Vanguard, and Cavaliers, and then also when I taught Cavaliers and Blue Knights. Pretty sure at Cavaliers it was every week, at least when I was there. So that's 5 members times 5 heads each per week. So you can just do the math real quick. And then Blue Knights, we in the past 2 years we used the Remo pinstripes, and those we actually found like we were able to use for a little longer, and we typically did full head changes every week and a half. And then in between those full head changes, sometimes heads will just go dead for a variety of reasons, really. So then we just change out what's necessary. Did you guys do something similar at Blue Devils?
My experience was a little bit different. Like when I was at Blue Knights, we used pinstripes on pearls, and we were able to get through heads like once a week, or head changes once a week. Blue Devils was a different story because they love cranking their drums, which I have mixed feelings about it. So we would go through head changes once every 5 days. So
Mm-hmm.
it was pretty frequent. That's when we had pearls, and then when we switched to system blues, it was once every like 4 days because the design of the drum kind of causes the head to pull a little faster, and also just the nature of cranking the heads so often caused the head to stretch a lot faster. So we had to do head changes really often.
Yeah.
We actually started doing this thing where the ones and twos would sometimes uh, they would die faster. So sometimes we change the threes and fours before we change the one and twos. Or sorry, we would change the threes,
Mm-hmm.
the three, four, and the spocks, like a couple blocks or a day before we change the top heads, the ones and twos. So
Mm-hmm.
that sort of helped, but in the end, we never got through a week with the same heads. So the fact that you can get
Mm.
through a week and a half is pretty impressive to me.
Yeah, it has to do with a few things. You mentioned just companies, what head on what type of drum. Yeah, that is a lot of heads indeed. Aiden,
Oh yeah,
400, sure.
yeah.
And talking about companies, but all the groups we're talking about are endorsed by those companies. At a high school, you wouldn't go through that many
Oh
heads.
man.
Um,
High school, I think
and
I did two head changes the entire year, maybe.
mhm. Yeah, and yeah, it really depends on your budget, on what you said, pitch too. Um, it also depends on how quickly you take them up. We usually take them up to a half step below our usual tuning scheme, and then play on them, let them stretch, rebalance them, and then take them up the next day. So if the Saturday is a regional, we'll usually do the full head change, hopefully Wednesday night. It depends on where we're at on tour, like whether if we're staying at the same housing site, then that's ideal. If we're moving, then we might do it a little earlier or later. But the with those heads on those drums, we've found that changing them Wednesday night, let them stretch overnight, and then tuning them up on Thursday, taking them up after every block, and then on Friday they might sound a little too ringy, and then by Saturday that's like this sweet spot.
Okay, well that's a pretty good structure you got. And I think the general consensus too is it depends on which heads you're using, which drums you're using, and how high you want them to go. So, okay, oh man, how did you become a tech, and do you get paid?
Well, how did I become a tech? I've always been interested in teaching, is number one. And so while I was marching in the States, I was already teaching in Belgium at this group called Drum Spirit. You should look them up. They're pretty cool. Still in touch with them, even though I don't teach them anymore. Anyway, when I aged out in 2011, I told well, we had three quad techs, but the main tech Cavaliers was Eric Reidenauer. And I just told it, like, I think 1 or 2 weeks after the season, I sent him a message and said, "Hey, I'm interested in teaching. If you hear of any drum corps who are looking for a tech, then please feel free to send them my information." Um, and that he said okay, and I didn't hear from him for the longest time, and was just ready to just kind of start planning my summer. This was for the 2012 season, and then one day in late March or early April, he sent me a message and asked me, "Hey, are you teaching anywhere?" And I said, "No. Why?" He's like, "Oh, just wondering." And then 2 minutes later, he's like, "All right, I'm not gonna beat around the bush. We need someone to cover some weeks at Cavaliers. Or is this something that would interest you?" And everyone would say yes, of course, and so did I. And basically, they had someone lined up, and that fell through. And they had talked about hiring me, but I was still in Belgium, so they didn't have a budget to fly me to camps, for example. But we made it work for the summer, and I got hired because I marched there. And I think a big part of it is just doing a good job as a member, not just playing wise, but also as a person. And that is just always important. Is just being a good person and a good member and taking care of business and showing that you are responsible and could be responsible for a line, to be in charge. Part of it is so that's one thing. Just knowing people is important. That's why I just told Eric, because I knew, quad text, no quad text, caption heads, no caption heads. Like there's just, since I started teaching, there's so many people I've just met just in the marching world, kind of in passing, like you get introduced and then maybe a year later you see them and there's just time to talk and you share the same passion and you encounter similar problems, or challenges or enjoyable moments. So that's the second one, is just networking. And then three is just also getting a little lucky, I guess.
Never discount luck.
Yeah, if they had, if the person they had lined up, if everything had worked out, then I wouldn't have taught Cavaliers 12. And then I don't know what would have happened. I wouldn't say I would have never taught drum corps, but things would have definitely looked different.
That's cool that even after all this time you're still able to do that. Just really quick, what do you do professionally?
Oh, I design websites.
Dude, you should design the Quad Method website. I can't. I'm using like Adobe. I'm like kind of renting one of their domains. But anyways,
we'll discuss that after.
Yeah, that's a little beyond me.
Yeah, I actually so I work from home. Like where I'm sitting right now is at my house, and this is at my desk where I spend most of my time during the week when I'm not teaching. Actually, with a buddy of mine, he owns an agency called Boldly Fine, and we did the Chino Hills website together. Redid it last summer.
Oh, wow.
So it's cool to, like they just needed a new website for the music department, and we marched academy together. He ended up going to Blue Devils and RCC. That was 2010 when he went to Blue Devils, and that's when I left for Vanguard. And it's cool to just we're still in touch. He was also a groomsman in my wedding. His name is Nick Oroko.
Oh yeah, no, I met him last summer.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, he's a great guy, and he just called me one day and was like, "Hey, do you want to collaborate on this project?" Because I work freelance, I work from home, and it's really easy to combine with teaching band and balancing those two passions. One brings in more money than the other. To answer the other question, yes, I do make money, but teaching drum corps and indoor, if you only taught those two things, you wouldn't be able to pay for rent and groceries and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the older guys that kind of continue to teach, a lot of them are teachers, so that they get the summers off and stuff like that. So it kind of works out.
Yeah.
For them. But that's a pretty good. Being a freelance is another cool way to still teach drum corps and all that.
Yeah, I think the majority of people who teach drum corps, I would say, teach school either as a teacher, like we were talking about Rick Barclay earlier, and you mentioned him last week, and he's a history teacher. A lot of people just teach band year round, and teach at a few schools, probably design for a couple schools as well, make ends meet that way. My wife and I actually both work from home, and Taha, the snare tech at Blue Knights, he also is I think his official title is staff coordinator at Monarch. Okay. He's a nurse, and he can combine those two really well, because he can take up to 2 weeks off at a time. So like in the summer, he'll be on for 2 weeks, then work for 2 weeks at home, and then be back to teach Blue Knights. The freelance life is enjoyable because we get to, we have a little more freedom with our schedules. We don't have to take time off or request time off or get our boss's permission. um, and it's fun, to be honest. Like that website, Chino Hills, it's just that's in the activity. Not all websites I make are for musicians. But it's cool because I can also just work on tour. So let's say next summer, I won't be working on tour full time, like on websites and designing and coding, but I can still answer customer emails, or if there's like a little tweak that needs to be made, or maybe I can talk to a client and brainstorm. And yeah, it's fun. I've found that I think if I taught band full time, I would get burned out. And just balancing band with something else works really well for me.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm still going to school, so I haven't run into that problem where I got to balance my career with my teaching. So, but I'll get there.
But you probably take more or less classes depending on the semester and where you were marching or teaching, right?
Yeah. Well, right now I'm trying to be an electrical engineer. So, so far, like I haven't. Right now, my biggest thing is like if I get an internship over the summer, like that might have to take precedence. But I haven't gotten to that point where I can get one yet. So, but
yeah,
we'll see. I'm gonna try to stay in the game for as long as possible.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's see. I saw a question. Oh, favorite non-tenor stick?
Favorite non-tenor stick? Oh man. Well, I'm an innovative artist, and with innovative, I would say the Jim Casellas.
Oh yeah.
I think feel really good. My favorite like pad stick from Innovative would be what used to be the ASMMs. They're actually discontinued now, so the former Mike McIntoshes. So the FSMMs are now MS4s. And so the Arena series, ASMMs, FS is Field Series. The Field Series are a little heavier. The Arena series are thinner and therefore lighter and just feel great, especially after aging out, what people refer to as old man hands. It's just, it's a little lighter, so a little less impact just on your body and just feels a little better in my opinion. Yeah, I like the Brett Coons as well. Yeah, that's the correct spelling. Also, I don't have I often don't feel super passionate about, this is the best stick and every other stick doesn't get close or vice versa. Like this is a horrible stick. I think there's a lot of good sticks out there, and it's also what you use them for. At Blue Knights, when we were with Vic Firth, it was the Mike Jackson stick, and I think that stick has a lot in common with the Jim Casellas in the Innovative series. Just kind of feel very similar, and they work really well with that writing. But then the MS4s at Innovative just work better with the kind of beats Cavaliers play, I would argue, or any system blues stick. When you have a book and the exercises Blue Devils play or RCC play, like that it works better. It like from a holistic perspective, kind of everything is related. Same with the how high you tune the drums has to do with the feel too.
That's interesting point you bring up. A lot of these things, a lot of the preferences for people are based on other factors that don't have to do with sticks or anything like how high you crank the head and what head you're using sometimes, and kind of just depends indoor outdoor. So
and if we're talking about player preference, it's a lot of it is about the feel, but as a designer, obviously there's a lot of factors to consider as well. What type of sound do you want? And there's whole science behind sticks. Like the type of bead will produce a different sound, or um, maybe you're going for this orchestral feel, and the snare is very light at the edge, or for quads, felts, or I think a lot of lines don't use mallets anymore, or not much, but those also produce a different sound. So it's balancing what the designer wants and what just also feels good to the members, because on the one hand, you don't want to sacrifice player comfort entirely, but on the other hand, it's about creating art and texture and just sound in general.
For sure. I like how we started off with non-tenor sticks. We ended up back at tenor sticks. But that's cool.
Yeah.
Now, quad heads? Favorite quad heads?
Whew. Man, I've never experimented with too many different quad heads, to be honest. I think and this goes with identity and preference again, and type of book you play. But I think, on the Mapex drums, the pinstripes work really well. I think another emo head, the Renaissance, works really well on Dynasty. So I think it has to do with and those you can tune a little lower and they still sound really good. Some heads you kind of have to crank. I think the pinstripes can sound good both lower and higher. With Evans, right now I'd say the EC2s.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep.
Yeah, for me, like if I had to pick one head for just general usage, pinstripes. I like pinstripes. It's a nice articulate sound, and for Evans, I would definitely go with the EC2s. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
For sure. Matt Johnson, how can I not suck at body, choreo, and movement? Actually, I'm trying to come up with some more marching videos. I haven't gotten to those yet, but they're coming. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
How do you get better at it? Sorry.
How do you get better at it?
I mean, I think the obvious answer is by doing it. And we talked about indoor. I don't teach fall bands, but just being involved in your high school's marching band, or maybe college, just working your way up. I think just body awareness is a big factor. That helps with marching too. Just being aware of what different muscles do and how that affects your posture, for example. To be honest, when I marched, I never did as much body as the lines I teach now. So I'm not like your best reference for that. But yeah, I look forward to seeing your videos.
Yeah, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna start with like posture stuff, because I think not everyone knows why or how or why we kind of need to stand up straight. And I think one of the things that kind of goes underlooked is what muscles you're using when you're trying to stand up straight. A lot of people, they don't use their core enough, so they end up tensing up their shoulders and their back in order to keep their body straight, and in that way, like, it makes it harder to play quad, especially because you got to do all these horizontal movement that require larger muscle groups. So, but we'll get to that in another video.
Yeah.
But sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, something else. It is just also, when you're in rehearsal, you get the music and you rep it and learn it, but then you go home and practice it. It's also the same with body movement and marching. Like, make sure you put that on your individual practice list. Don't expect to just only wear the drums in rehearsal. Like, even if you don't have access to drums in a harness, you can still do a lot of body movement without wearing the drums, and do it in front of a mirror or videotape yourself, and just like, if you feel like you're unaware of your body, like you're not totally in control and it feels awkward, I think step one is just seeing what you look like. It's like teaching a line. A lot of it is being in front of the line and just seeing differences. And and hearing what it sounds like up front. And if you just videotape yourself, you kind of get the same advantage, and you just teach yourself. So even though my comment doesn't give you very specific advice on what to do, just make sure you're also practicing that. And if you need to work out, I mean, you should probably work out or exercise in general just to be healthy.
Yeah.
But wearing quads, you just have to develop those muscles and strengthen them, because part of it might be that, like Steven, what you're bringing up, core muscles. You need to be able to just wear the drums and control them. And like, let's say you're just doing a fast turn, like you need a lot of control in the core muscles or in your core to just like stop the drums from turning. Like the thing as a quad drummer, like when you're turning, I feel like when you lock the turn, you often have to kind of counterbalance the turn a little, like from your hips. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just to make sure it's a clean stop and it doesn't look like the drums are still spinning or turning like a split second later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So even though your texts or whoever's teaching you, they talk about your hands a lot and all that and how you sound. Don't forget that a lot of what we do involves the rest of your body in terms of just marching and holding your 35, 40-pound drums. So I guess the more you march and the more you dance, the better you'll get. So okay, we're gonna take a quick break from the questions, and since we have you on. So yeah, if you guys weren't here earlier, Tomas is kind of unique in the sense that he's from across the ocean. He's from Europe. So yeah, so let's go back to the topic of how did you kind of, because if you didn't do band in like high school, like how did you kind of get involved in DCI, and what were kind of the things you had to go through in order to make that happen and go, do the things you did?
So where I grew up, it's in this little coastal town in Belgium. That's my country of origin. And the town is called Ostende, or in English, Ostend. It's Ostend. There's a local marching band there. They're still around. Their name is Kunnen. And I just went to basically a local band show, which wasn't school related. It's just independent, because everything's independent, or 99% of marching bands are. Okay, so I used to be in sports, in a sport called handball. And what I've come to learn is that there's a different American handball that's not the same as the handball in the rest of the world, which is actually an Olympic sport. It's a pretty fast-paced contact sport. And the arena or the field is about the same size almost as it's almost like a mix of basketball and soccer. Definitely worth looking up. Anyway, so I used to be in sports, and one of my best friends there, this was co-ed for kids. Her brother was in this local band, and took me to a show, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. And so this is in Belgium, but there was actually a Dutch drum corps there called Beatrix. They've taken a few trips to the States. I think in 2004 and 2008 for sure, and then maybe some other years, but I'm not sure about that. And I saw them perform, and that was like my first exposure to drum corps, and saw the quads there. And actually the people I was with called them quints, which is, some people call them that. It's not a very popular term today. And I was like, I want to play that. And I was already taking like drum set lessons, but that night I decided I'm going to be in band and I'm going to play quads. And so I joined the local band, and my two instructors there actually marched drum corps. One of them was called Johan Delaco, and he's the first Belgian to ever march DCI. He actually marched a Canadian corps on trumpet. And he found out, I think in the 70s, like he found out about drum corps. Some corps were touring Europe, and there were a few drum corps in Europe. So that's how he found out. And then my other instructor, his name is Bruce. He actually, at the time when I joined the band, he was trying out for Blue Devils Pit, and was actually there for 01, 02, 03. And they just showed me videos and introduced me to, what DCI is. And I just fell in love with it right away. And this is 2001. So I was in middle school at this time. And just since seeing my first videos, that just was my dream. And I was just going to make it happen one day. And just over the years, being in middle school, then high school, it started becoming more of a plan than just like a dream and this thing I was going to do one day. And so all groups I was in were independent groups in Europe. And actually, the group I got most of my drumming experience at before marching drum corps is called Chameleon Percussion. And they're not around anymore, but it was like a standstill drum line. And the idea was there. So the name is Chameleon, and we all played every instrument in the battery. Like for maybe one or two pieces, I'd be on snare drum. And then for this other piece, I'd be on quads and then also on bass drum. And we kind of rotated and kind of depended on, individual strengths. Like this one piece we played was pretty choppy on snare drum. So it was like all the strongest players on snare drum. And then the quad parts were just more of an accompaniment and more melodic. But then this other piece was just really advanced on quads. I wasn't on the quad line for that one at the time. But then I decided, or I learned, I just needed marching experience. So then I marched this group in the Netherlands called Percussion Unlimited, and they're actually still around. When I taught drum spirit, we were actually competitors in the European indoor circuit. So like through the years, from just watching the first video in middle school and just falling in love with just what I saw, I just started looking at, my first pair of drumsticks was Vic Firth. And this is also like when the internet started becoming very, very mainstream. And Vic Firth had a website.
Oh.
So I went to the website. This was the fall or winter of 2000. Or maybe it was later. Doesn't really matter. It was like videos, like the first lot videos from the 2000 or 2001 summer. And through that, things also became more educational, and I was just reading a lot. And that was actually a great influence for my English too, is reading all these like articles and interviews and watching instructional videos from Bill Bachman, for example.
Love this.
Yeah, and in 2005, Blue Devils made a European tour. And at the time, two quad drummers on that 05 line were Tim Jackson and Jared Andrews. And got to meet those guys like in person, and also realized, because Tim Jackson had already won his first INE championship by that point in 04, or first two, I guess, 03 or 04. Anyway, just learning that those are not just gods, but they're people. Like you can just walk up to them and introduce yourself and shake their hands and have a conversation and learn from them. So I was like learning and figuring out what I needed to be able to march drum corps. So when I was a senior in high school, sorry, this is a long story. But when I was a senior in high school, I was, getting ready to graduate, and the opportunity was going to be there soon for me to be in the States and audition and march. And I figured the best way to do that was to be a foreign exchange student at an American school, and then, be local, be in the fall band, get experience, audition, like drive or fly to a camp, and so on and so on. And I ended up going to school at Arizona State, and a few people that, which is in Tempe, Arizona, which is where the academy is based out of. And just a few guys in the percussion studio had just marched Academy 07, and I just met them and was drumming with them and learning from them. And Um, just drove to auditions. That's the only year I was able to drive to camps. Everything else was flying, and it was fortunate enough that I was good enough. Like I did practice a lot, and I got a spot, and yeah, the rest is history.
Wow, that's quite the story. You've been all over the place. Uh, that's cool,
Yeah,
dude.
for sure.
That's amazing that you kind of you went through all that. Like it wasn't simply you just went to high school, you did your high school thing, and then you auditioned for a drum corps. You had to find the right places to go to, and you had to meet the right people, and I think that's inspiring. A lot of a lot of the kids here in the U.S. kind of have that luxury of just like going to high school, doing the high school program, um, and then if you're good enough or you get taught well enough, then you can go on to do the drum corps thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, something you mentioned, yeah, meeting when you met Tim Jackson and Jared, and for all you guys that are watching out there that haven't really met maybe the group that you look up to, we're all just people. we're not even if we're good at playing scrapes here and there, we're just normal people. We're just yeah. So that's something I learned too. Like for me, it was the Blue Devils line from like '09 to 12, and the Cavaliers from like 11. Oh no, Cavaliers, yeah, 10 and 11. Uh, I admired them, and I thought they were just untouchable. And then I
Hmm.
met them, and I was like, wow, they're just normal people, um,
Yep.
just like you and I. So don't be afraid of going to talk to people that you want to be someday. So, but
Yeah.
that's an awesome story, man. Wow. So
Yeah, I was really remote from, I mean, I did have good instruction in Belgium, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't quite, how should I say it? It wasn't quite at the same level, or the activity evolves so quickly. Like a lot of the information I found in Europe is kind of outdated a little. Even though the basics are the basics, like rebounding a stick is rebounding a stick, and
yeah.
that is not going to change. um, but yeah, I did my research. I knew who was who. Like I knew, okay, let's say you want to march Blue Knights, but you live on the East Coast. This is, there are people that I've met on auditions who, match this profile. Like there's not many people on the East Coast who teach our technique. So you just got to learn, who teaches where. So let's say, I'm giving advice on someone who wants to march Blue Knights, then read bios, watch videos, do and just kind of figure out who teaches where and who teaches where in the winter. Like, yeah, we're all at Blue Knights, and about half of the Blue Knight staff is at Broken City or Vessel in the winter. But then, there's one of Taha is at Monarch. I'm at Rhythm X. Just to give some examples. Also, who did we march with? Where did we march? Like, do those groups play similarly to us? Like maybe you're not good enough to make Blue Knights this year, but there's plenty programs out. Not plenty. There's a few programs out there that have very similar philosophies, and also nowadays you can reach out and get Skype lessons. Moving is always an option. I moved across the ocean, but there's a lot of people who just move to march indoor. Drum corps, you can kind of stay where you're at and just fly. But a lot of people move because the group they want to march in the winter is worth it to move for. And some people put school on hold. Some people take online courses, and then like after they age out, just move back, complete their degree. Those are all options, but you just got to know where to find the education that you want to get.
Yeah. I totally lost my train of thought. Uh, yeah, and please go. It's always beneficial to just reach out to somebody. Like even if you shot them a message, they might not know you, but you say, hey, I'm interested, or you have any tips for Blue Knights auditions or something like that. Usually, the worst that can happen is they just won't respond. But I mean, they're not gonna think worse of you for reaching out. If anything, they'll think more of you for taking some initiative. So.
And if they don't get back to you, don't take that personal. And in my time, I definitely also sent. It was more emails. Facebook started becoming more popular in like 07, 08. But so like I mentioned 2005. I had never heard of Facebook. I'm not sure what year they started. I feel like it was 2004, but that doesn't matter. Some of my emails I got a good response. Sometimes it was just too short of a response, and some of them never. I never got a reply, and that's fine. There are different reasons why people wouldn't get back to you. Also, with modern platforms, I personally don't just put everything on public. Most of my posts are like friends only. I don't always accept friend requests from people I don't know. But you can find my email address online, and if you send me an email, then I'll probably get back to you at some point. But Facebook or Instagram just might not always be the best platform. It depends, like on your platform, the quad method, like you just are on social media. So that's where people are going to get in touch and are going to get a response. But that doesn't mean every single instructor out there is publicly on social media. So
yeah, and I mean, I'm not the best with handling social media, so sometimes I take a little while to get back, but I always do my best to at least respond to anybody who has questions or whoever, sends me a message through the quad method. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and get back to some questions. That was a fantastic story, so thank you for sharing that. So there's a couple questions regarding callback auditions, kind of like tips or pointers for callback auditions. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yes. First of all, I would like to refer everyone to your video last week, your live Q&A.
Oh yeah.
I mean, all the points you made about callbacks, I definitely agree with. Kind of adding to that, or probably reiterating some points, are it's definitely, I agree with the point you made. It's more of an audition and less of a clinic or experience camp. So, the pressure is going to be higher. The people around you are going to be better. Like, I definitely know for some camps, like some of the callbacks at any core, including Blue Knights, were the stellar player at that camp. And it might have been like a satellite camp. But everyone at callbacks is going to be good and great and prepared. Be ready for that and try to create pressure for yourself. Something I would do when I was auditioning is just play every exercise in the packet, 2 reps of each exercise, and just mark, like, was that great? Was that perfect? Like, no ticks? Or wasn't it? And that was the only option. It was great or not. It was not like it was okay. Then it would have been not great, right? Just videotaping yourself creates this pressure, even if you're never going to post it anywhere. You just get more aware of what you're doing. Something else is just playing for someone. Let's say you march somewhere in the winter, just have them, sit down and, maybe on a lunch break or a water break or any type of break, and same thing, just 8 clicks and you're in. Can you just throw down? Like, can you make your preparation show up? And, how to practice and all that is a whole nother topic, but you got to make sure that you show your best under pressure. Because I honestly think callbacks, in a way, are more stressful than a DCI finals lot with, 10 cameras. Because in a sense, in that lot setting, you've already done the routine so many times. You're wearing the uniform. You're marching next to your buddies, even when you're on the end. Like, something about that is more is less stressful, I think, than you're being evaluated and are you going to make the line or not. That's one thing. Um, be ready to move for sure. We've definitely made decisions based on that. If two people are very comparable in playing abilities, it's like if one is obviously a better marcher, then we'll probably take that person. Um, be a good person in a few ways. Anywhere you've marched, we probably know who taught you, and we do background, not background checks, but we'll reach out
Word gets
to our
around.
friends who teach at other places, and I know one thing on paper is you can't sign a contract with us if you owe money to another organization. That's just a policy. But also just, were you a good member? How did you do on tour? Like how did you handle tour? So just make sure you anywhere you march, and like if you don't make it at your desired group this year and you end up marching elsewhere, then make that the best experience and be the best version of yourself there. That's something that maybe members are not always aware of. By the time I was trying out for Cavaliers, that was Eric Reinauer, who I mentioned earlier, explicitly told me he contacted my Vanguard tech because they marched together at Vanguard in 2004, and that helped me make the line. Not that that's a deciding factor. Um, it's not just who you know, but it's just like, did you do a good job? What else for callbacks? You said have fun, make friends. We, you know, Veronica, the caption hand of Blue Knights, Veronica Wicks. I know her from an audition, and we never marched together, but that's where we met. Like you never know the people you meet, 10 years from now, what they will mean to you, like where they will be in your life. It's kind of crazy to think about. Like, don't be so self-centered and focused on I got to make the line that you're not an enjoyable person to the people around you because you might end up marching with them at some point. Um, I don't know. Just be ready for just things that are not in the packet too. Um, I like seeing things way slower than in the packet. Because most packets, at least that I've seen, have written tempos. Um, Also faster. You know, not because an exercise says it's at 180. That doesn't mean we're not allowed to ask you to play it 10 clicks faster as a staff. Be ready for individual playing, but also like your listening can also be evaluated. Think that's most of what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to kind of advocate a couple of your points too. Um, yeah, the just playing in front of somebody is a great way to prepare yourself, because when you play with other guys that are auditioning, we're kind of us as auditioners are kind of looking at we're kind of comparing you to other guys based on like how you look and how well you listen. But in the end, like we're gonna have to figure out how well you sound by yourself so that we can like figure out what kind of sound you produce. So eventually, there's gonna be a down the line or an individual audition, and if you can learn to overcome the nerves of being judged individually, that's going to help you a lot. So yeah, I'd highly advise you to just ask a friend like, hey, can you watch me play this? And give yourself only one rep. Like there's no second tries. You only get one shot. Um, and I know some texts kind of put more weight on individual auditions than others, but in the end, it's how do you sound by yourself, not just how well do you listen. And I feel like sometimes we don't listen to ourselves enough. We're not comfortable listening to ourselves because we're so focused on playing with the person next to us or something like that. Um, and yeah,
On
just
the other hand, though, I also I definitely agree, but there's also another side to that is just at callbacks we want to see, like in 2 weeks I want to see the Blue Knights 2019 quad line, um, which is more than a bunch of individuals.
sure.
We want strong individual players, but we also want to see a group of people who are gonna drum together and live together, tour together, you know, go through bad times together, go through great times together. Like, does your vibe and, you know, whatever you, however you want to interpret that word, does that match or at least fit in with just kind of the rest of the vibe, like less of the rest of the people's vibe? Um, Definitely including vets, but also just everyone there. Like, you might not know who we're considering. Vets in most places are also still auditioning. Um, that's important too.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Because it's, I mean, in the end, it's not about this individual player. Like you kind of mentioned how sometimes doing an audition is more, you get more nervous than like doing finals in front of 40 cameras. And I think that's true because, you know, when you're in front of 40 cameras, you're not by yourself. You're with the guys that you spent your whole summer with, the guys that are on your team that you rely on to do well, you know. So, yeah, it's in the end, it's about who's gonna be the best team player too.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just the last thing, something you said is you know, like we were talking about earlier, quad techs kind of know each other just cause, you know, like we didn't have to, like I this is the first time I've ever met Tomas, but you know, we have mutual friends and we just kind of know each other by name and stuff like that. So not saying, I'm not saying like don't be fake when you're around techs, but you know, just be a good person, be considerate, you know, all those things, because you never know when that's going to be the deciding factor of whether or not you make the group that you want to be at. So, but yeah, I mean I think that's a lot to think about already. So, um,
Dude, I mean, playing quads for a drum corps is there are a lot of things that go into it, you know.
there really are, and everything we've talked about so far has nothing to do with like how to actually play quads, which is totally fine. You know, we could go into that for the next hour and a half if we really wanted to, but we're not. So yeah, so we hit the 1 hour point, so we'll start wrapping it up with a few more questions. Yeah, let's see. I forgot. Tips for indoor? Kind of vague, but
Oh man.
I mean, there's a lot.
Could you elaborate on the question? I don't know who asked the question. Like, be a little more specific.
Mr. Green Sheep. Okay, yeah, we'll get back to that one. And yeah, there's a lot you could say about indoor. Is there a drastic sound difference between drum brands? I wouldn't say drastic.
I mean, it also depends on what
head you're using.
What you understand under drastic. You know,
yeah.
There's definitely a noticeable difference, I would say. Like, you can notice if you, with an experienced ear and maybe having taught different lines that use different brands, or switching or marching. The Yamaha snare is not a Pearl snare, you know, and same with quads. To call it drastic, it depends on different things, like tuning, the sticks you use, how you play, really also go into that. Like, yeah, a Yamaha snare and a Pearl snare don't sound the same, but you can tune each one very differently. You know, like one Yamaha snare with, you know, let's say Remo heads and a certain type of Vic Firth sticks, compared to another Yamaha snare with Evans heads, different tuning, different sticks, could also sound drastically different. So I would say, you know, you can't quite make them sound exactly the same, but you can get them really close if you're trying to not be drastic.
It's also arguable what a better sound really means too. Like, one drum might sound better to you, that same drum might sound worse to me. It's like there's a lot.
Yeah.
Apples and oranges, man.
Yeah, and man, what I've learned is its identity and style. I actually wrote an article. I'm not sure you're aware, or listeners or, you know, followers are aware. My kind of output to the activity has been just publishing some articles on drumming on Medium. You can find me there. Here, I'll type my username in the chat if I may
And
advertise.
you can give me the link afterwards, and I'll post that too.
Yeah. So that's my username on Medium. I'm not sure what the link would be. The specific article I'm referring to is titled "What is Sound Quality?" Because most instructors I know talk about sound quality, but then those groups can sound very different, is what I've observed. And it just kind of, what I like, my mind is very analytic, and I try to break things down. And then I also enjoy almost of an academic writing, hopefully not boring academic, but just, kind of very structured, to the point. Like I don't want a bunch of fluff. I don't write clickbait, like 10
Oh
reasons
man.
why, like this or that, and then you have to click through like three pop-ups.
So I don't use Facebook very much anymore.
Oh man, it's difficult sometimes. I've learned that when you don't click the clickbait, eventually the algorithm kind of filters it out for you, at least to a certain extent. Anyway, like if you read that article, you'll also see that, even the word quality can mean different things. Like you could say something is A grade or C, like it kind of ranking things. But quality is also like something can have a warm quality, like kind of, colors. I wouldn't say one color is pretty and there's ugly colors. I think any color can be beautiful, but it depends on context and what you're going for. So that might be interesting to the aspiring quad drummer.
Yeah, and Tamaz also read a cool article on flam drags, which I found very insightful. So if you have time, you guys should definitely go read that one too. Okay, yeah, and I'll post your link in the description of this video, and I'll try to get it in another post when I can.
Yep, sounds great.
Cool. So you guys had some other like kind of simple questions regarding like harnesses and scrapes and what to pack. We're kind of running out of time here, so I want to end on the question from Anthony. For the performance aspect of the activity, what would be the best way to, quote, get outside of your comfort zone and perform better? Huh. I have a tough time getting my kids to kind of do that, so.
Whew. I've learned there are a few things. And this is definitely going in a like more intangible direction. Anthony, like I understand why you're asking, like you can look up a video on how to rebound the drumstick, or, take a lesson and read a book and kind of figure it out. And, people can put that into words, and you can learn that and just kind of check it off. Getting outside of your comfort zone and performing better is more almost meta, like
You're getting spiritual now.
It's difficult. Yeah, it's difficult to teach too, to be honest. One thing that I know you're asking about the performer side, but as a designer, is you need to design a show that members can buy into, which doesn't mean it needs to be an obvious show. The Broken City podcast, the first one, Mike Jackson kind of talked about that. Some groups do very obvious themed shows, and other groups do more abstract. And that doesn't mean that an abstract show you can't perform as well, but you have to be able to connect to the show. So I would say that's one thing is, do you understand? So as a performer then, do you understand what the show is about? And that doesn't have to be a story, but it can be an emotion or an idea, or that's one thing. Two is, I think a lot of performance is body language, mainly facial expression. It's like, have you ever stood in front of a mirror and made faces? And like, are you aware of when you use a certain muscle, like how that makes your face look? And I think for some people it comes very naturally. For some people it doesn't. And if it doesn't, that doesn't mean you'll always be a bad performer. I think, kind of studying, like we all watch YouTube videos, in the lot, and you just have your, lines or individuals you follow on Instagram and look up to, and you try and mimic their hands, but why not mimic their facial expressions too? For example, one great performer that comes to mind is Tyler Doan, who was the center for Blue Knights and aged out in 2017, center snare. He also marched Broken City. Is just, you know, observe him and try and mimic what he's doing and when he's doing it. Um, like how does he portray soft dynamics or over the head rim shots? Like what happens here? And it might feel super unnatural at first, and like meaning I think that's one interpretation of outside your comfort zone. Um, but it's at least awareness. Kind of also what we talked about with just body movement is step one is just being aware. Like, um, so at first it might be super unnatural, but I think eventually it'll evolve into this. Like you develop your own body language and way of expressing what you're doing. And I don't want it to be forced, and no one wants it to be forced. I don't really believe in, sitting down and, okay, this is the emotion we're portraying, and this is now the emotion, unless that's really like your show is about emotions. Like it has something about it has to be individual and your story. But if you vibe well with the other quad drummers you're playing with and marching next to, then it's probably going to be similar in a way, like it, because it's a little different doesn't mean it's dirty or not clean. So I think that I hope that answers at least part of that question. That's at least my advice.
Yeah, and me personally, I would YouTube is definitely a good way to start, and yeah, I would agree. Like, definitely go watch some groups that you really go watch groups that you enjoy watching because of how they perform. For me, it was definitely RCC, like in 2012, 2009 too. Like, it's they get pretty wild sometimes, but yeah, just kind of copy what they do, and more importantly, when they do it. Like a lot of people just make the same face for like the whole show. It's like that's not quite appropriate, Just like with music, facial expression and body language has to be dynamic. Like you probably wouldn't be making a really mean face with your teeth bared, when you're playing a piano roll on Spock. It's not quite appropriate. But something I would try to maybe advise you to do is watch a video, like a lot video of a group without without watching them. Like just listen to it. Listen to the music and then watch the video and see how their body language and how their facial expression kind of mimics what they're playing. And how it kind of fits in with the musicality of what they're playing. And that will kind of help you understand like how to move with the music. And yeah, looking in a mirror. If you're embarrassed to look at yourself in a mirror, it's going to be really hard to kind of get over the fact that other people are watching you. But trust me, you're going to look more silly if you're the only guy not performing as opposed to being the only guy that's actually going for it.
And yeah, and don't be afraid to be yourself. You don't have to be someone. I mean, it almost sounds cheesy, but yeah, it's develop your body language, and yeah, you might feel a little silly at first, but I think throughout, marching for me was just an exposure to stuff I just hadn't been exposed to. For me, it was in a foreign country, but also, let's say Rick Barclay, he was the first, at the time, he was on a raw vegan diet. I don't think I had ever met a vegan person, let alone someone who didn't, cook their food beyond a certain temperature. And and all of that it's cool. Like it's so enriching. And like some groups like Blue Knights, it's so diverse where people come from, who they are, when they're not drumming. But just everyone, what I've learned is that when people can't be themselves or don't allow themselves to be themselves, it doesn't quite work out as well as when you're just like, all right, I'm gonna stand behind the quads and just like kind of put it all out there and just perform my heart out and be in the zone and just you know it's kind of like letting go in a sense. Like don't tell yourself that you look silly. Like you shouldn't be thinking like that voice. Like just block it out.
Yeah,
And
and
just be be in the moment and in the music.
it gets to a point where you performing is it feels good because it's kind of a release. It's like it's you in your natural habitat. It's you allowing yourself to be yourself, and kind of performing is it almost becomes a I don't know what the right word is, but yeah, just kind of a release from all the other stress you got going on, whether it's school or your job or something. So
There there's something tribal about drumming.
oh yeah, absolutely.
Like someone commented totem or totem. Definitely a fan of that show. But that, kind of totem tribal. It's almost that's probably a little easier to kind of buy into, but it just connects us with tribal times and drumming around a campfire. When you're really in the groove.
Yeah, absolutely. Totem was man that was that. If you guys didn't know, that was from. I talked to a lot of the vets from that year, and they said like that show was the most physically demanding thing like ever, and I sweat just by watching that show. It's crazy, but yeah, I agree. So I guess something to take away from a lot of what we've been talking about is like a lot of what we do when it comes to either being a performer or being an educator or just doing whatever in the activity. It's not always about just the drumming. It's not always about the performing. It's also kind of about the camaraderie and just kind of why we do things. Like we don't do this because we make a lot of money. We do this because we love what it's done for us and what it does for the next generation of performers, of kids and stuff like that. And I think that's awesome because it shows that we actually believe in the activity. It's not just we're doing this to make some extra bucks because really we're not making that much. But so and on that note, like be grateful if you have somebody a tech in your life or a teacher or something that is really believes in what they do and really tries to teach you something. Just thank them every now and then because they believe in you and they believe in what you're doing. So. But do you have anything to part with our viewers?
Oh man. Ooh, yeah. I think there was one topic you and I kind of talked about beforehand that we were going to touch upon, and we didn't
Yeah.
quite get to it. I think we can spend about five more minutes
Okay.
on
Yeah.
it.
Sure.
Is what was it? Skill sets
Oh,
overlooked.
overlooked. Yeah, just things that are like overlooked when it comes to quad playing.
We kind of touched upon it a little bit with the simultaneous responsibilities. I think okay. Let's talk about the term quad heights or quad taps.
Okay.
Like, do you know
Sure.
what I'm referring to?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Um, I think that is one option on the palette or in your vocabulary. Like as a quad drummer, you need to be able to play heights just like snares do it. Heights or dynamics, both really, and however what you want to interpret that. Um, because we're quad drummers doesn't mean we can't. Like let's say we're talking about inches, we can't. That doesn't mean we can't stop the stick at 3 inches. Like if that's a skill you don't possess, you need to go. Like you need to put that as your number one priority, like right now, as far as technique is concerned. That's just a huge and really important skill in how drum lines make music. We use contrast to make music. The brass needs our accents, and then all the stuff in between, all the low end stuff, inner beats, flams, drags, whatnot. That's like for us. Um, so you need to be able to one, just control that. Two, when you playing around, just don't let that fly out the window. Like don't just accept that. Um, physically, not every round you can stop the stick that low. I'm very aware of that. But it goes hand in hand with the writing. Like, when is it appropriate to say, okay, the taps can come up a little here? Um, if what the quads play need to be really, like, if the snares play something really similar, it needs to be super balanced, then the around can be so advanced that it gets in the way of playing the taps and balancing them low with the snares. So if you're in a quad line where you get to adjust some parts, or if you're a quad tech or aspiring quad tech that gets to go through the parts, like there's the arranger, and then the quad tech is kind of the filter, make sure everything makes sense, there's no awkward like pushes. Be appropriate. When it's a quad feature, it's usually okay for the taps to be a little higher, and sometimes even desirable from a listening perspective too, to just have a little more body in the sound. That's one thing. Personally, when I evaluate a quad drummer at auditions, even in round one, like, if you can't play with a strict forte piano, really nice contrast, then you're just not ready to make Blue Nights, for example. That is one skill. Two is be aware that you're playing a musical instrument. And I'm not advocating against cool arounds, because I love those too. But the sound you produce is a factor that you can't sacrifice, and dynamics is one of them. By the way, dynamics, I think I think it's easy for quad drummers to play too light and not produce enough sound. Like, and our dynamic range can often be here, and a snare drummer's dynamic range and bass drummers is like here. Like, you need to be here also. Anyway, listen to the sounds you produce. Talking about playing zones mainly. Obviously, I think drum 4 zones are the most obvious, but if you really listen closely, there's a lot of dead drum 1 zones out there. And it's just a little less noticeable because it's higher pitched and just smaller drum. But if you're being that specific in the listening, you can clean up a lot of that too. And then on the other hand, you also want to play scrapes and crossovers. You don't just want to do. It can't just be a snare book with just outside accents and that's all you do. Maybe at beginner level, but I would argue, scrapes can be appropriate for maybe not beginners, but kind of one step above that. Probably not the most advanced or the fastest patterns, but it is cool to play scrapes and crossovers and innovative and crazy arounds. And I think with experience comes that, I use the word appropriate. That's very hard to define. And same as quality, what you would find appropriate, I wouldn't necessarily find appropriate. But I do know when I'm teaching at Blue Nights that, this is going to be appropriate for what Mike writes. Or Rhythm X, we actually edit more of the arounds there. What's going to be appropriate for what Tim Jackson wants and what he's going for. So consider those. I think snare drummers just not necessarily snare drummers, but there's this stigma of quad drummers that we can't play heights and we can't play rhythms. You need to be able to play everything on drum too. No excuses. Yeah, it's gonna feel different. I know that, but you need to be able to do that. That needs to be in your vocabulary.
Yeah, and people, you can't claim that quads are harder to play the snares if you're making all these exceptions for what they do. It's like, they can play heights and they can play dynamics, but we can play rounds even if we can't. It's like, no, that's not how it works. I think what a lot of people do that they shouldn't be doing is where they make I'll say this. What you should be doing is you should be making, when it comes to rounds and stuff, sometimes you got to make exceptions, but you should be making physical exceptions in order to make it sound good. Sometimes when you do crossovers, sometimes you got to go a little more French and all that. But I think some people do it the other way around, where they make exceptions in sound quality in order to play the arounds correctly. And I think that's a little backwards. I think it needs to be the other way around, where you're doing whatever you can in order to produce the best sound, or the appropriate sound for what you're playing. So, yeah, I totally agree. I think quad taps is just an excuse to, I don't know, get away with bad heights. But
yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think at some point it is appropriate to say, all right, these taps are quad height or quad taps.
Hey, I think there is a realistic factor. Like sometimes you can't achieve 3 inches if you're playing suicides across 3 and 4. And I don't know why you'd write that, but but yeah, no, you're right in that sense. But yeah, dynamics I do think is a very overlooked topic amongst quad players, especially when it comes to just moving those around. If anything, usually the writing kind of reflects the dynamic shaping of music. A lot of times experienced writers will write arounds that tonally kind of accentuate the shaping of music. So it's supposed to help it, not hinder it.
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, I don't know who's all watching and listening, but I think one of the kind of standard things to do is, if it's softer, use a higher pitched drum. If it's louder, use drums 3 and 4. But you also don't want to always do that.
Yeah.
Like sometimes the around kind of takes care of the dynamics. Like if you want a crescendo, you're gonna go from smaller drums to larger drums, and whatever around you want to do. But sometimes you just want a piano sound on drum 4, and you should also be able to do that, or a forte sound on spike and spook.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all good. All right, so we got a little bit over, but that's totally okay. Thank you for coming on, Tomas.
My pleasure. Thank you.
A very insightful conversation. So hope you guys learned something. I'm going to actually try to timestamp this video, unlike the other videos, so that you guys can kind of scrub through this and pick whatever topic you guys want to hear about, because this is an awesome conversation. So I know some of you guys had other just small questions. If you want those questions answered, you can message the Quad Method through Facebook or Instagram. Do you take questions through messaging?
Actually, why don't you? You and I can be in touch. They can just contact the Quad Method,
okay,
and we'll sort out. Because I saw a few are questions for you,
sure.
A few are for me.
Okay,
we'll sort it out from there.
Yes. So if you have just random questions, just message us. If you want a question specifically answered by Tomas, I can always forward it to him. So maybe we'll do it that way. So all right. Well, thank you again, and I'd love to have you back on at some point. So in the future,
yeah,
this was awesome.
Sure.
So I'll see you guys soon.